at is we're actually going to spiceworks.com. And so at Spiceworks, we're going to create an account, and we're going to look at some of the tools that are there, including a network monitor and a help desk ticketing system and such there. So this is a great tool that you can run. Some of you are already ahead and on the scan. That's great. We'll get everybody here at the same point. But what I want to do is while it scans, because it's going to take a while to scan, is then we can jump in and talk about some of our other items in here. So if you will join me at spiceworks.com, and you will need to either sign in or log in. So if you have not created an account there, it'll say, well, I log in. You can do it through Facebook or LinkedIn, but I would probably just create a new account. I have an account, so I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'll give you a few minutes to create this really, really quick account. If I can remember my password. There we go. Okay. So I am logged in. So give you a couple of minutes to do that and make sure you've got an account. So on top of everything else that Spiceworks will do, I'm going to do a real quick tour while some of you are creating an account. Probably the most important thing I like about this, or that it's interesting, is the community. And so some of my classes we talk about social sites and social media. So there are all different kinds of things in here, including, let me get rid of the cookies piece. So inside this community there are things, so I want to know about the inventory program, and there is an entire Spiceworks community, and you can find additional information, and there's different resources. So if I want to ask a question, so for example, here's a list of some of the people in the community. You can look at different categories. So maybe I'm concerned with security. There is an entire discussion board forum, and that is updated, and you'll see some of these are from today, 4 hours ago, 12 hours. And most of these people on here, and there's, depending on which numbers you look at, 20 to 30,000 or more IT professionals, they're very responsive to questions. Now, if you ask the same question 10 times in a row, like any discussion board, they're going to get a little short and cranky, but it's a great resource to find information. So they are also, one of the things that is interesting on this is there are representatives, and sometimes you can even see some of them. You'll see they have the name here. So Stacy here is responding in this post is actually with a company called CDW, which is one of the largest computer distributors. There's Dell representatives. There's one from something called KnowBe4, which is a security firm. So there's tons of different people responding in here. And so it's a really great way to get an eye-opening awakening and find out a ton of information and ask questions and figure out what's going on. So from the community aspect, you can just do Peru State College or some other, but you don't have to necessarily be in a business. All right. So once you've created this account and you're in here, then we can look at some of the other features and things that are in here. So there are a lot of events. In fact, there's Spiceworks events and different things, but it really is. So here's security reviews. Here's for a review somebody did of Zimbra and WebRoot and different pieces. So there's a ton of information in here. And then if I want to search for something, so maybe I want to search for ProCurve 2650, which is an older model of switch. there's all different kinds of topics about that and different ones that I can't ping the switch, I can't do blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to give you a ton of information about what's going on in the world. So I'm going to go back to the home page. All right, everybody have an account now? Sweet. You guys are really quiet. Weather's changing. All right, so we're going to download the inventory tool. So I'm going to click on inventory right up here. And the inventory tool is really kind of a handy little thing. This is a tool for almost all businesses. I recommend something like this tool. And so it's a fairly small tool. In this case, it's going to take about 30 seconds to download. And then we'll install it. And in this case, I'm installing it directly on the computer. We'll take it back off later. It's not going to hurt anything. But if you're using a Mac, I would actually come in here and go to Spiceworks in a browser and do this in Windows. And so once it's downloaded, I'm going to click Install. And I'll get the screen of acknowledgement. So let me type in lab user Crew 2017. So it's actually a little easier sometimes. Unpacking data. And again, it's put its install window on the other screen, so I apologize for that. All right, so now once it's to this stage, I can move this over. So remember we talked about all those ports earlier? We've had that discussion. Well, this actually blatantly right up there says, install web server on port 9675. That's its defined normal port. If we had a conflict, we could change that to a different port. So we could change it to 9000 or 10001 or something else. But in this case, I'm just going to click Next. It's going to ask, I want to install a couple of optional components. So Nmap we're actually going to work with later, so it's fine that we install it. And the other one you should recognize, WinPCAP gets installed when you install Wireshark. So they're already there, but we're going to go ahead and let it click the install anyway, and that way it'll make sure it's pointing to the correct locations to run them. Destination folder should be fine. And then it's going to install, and it should probably take a couple of minutes to install. So again, our college and a lot of businesses use software similar to this. Our campus uses a tool called Case, and my understanding is Case is about $20,000 a year. So you're getting a free tool that will do what a $20,000 tool, most of what a $20,000 tool will do. Files. There it's installing Nmap. All right, so it now says, hey, I've installed it. Do I want to install a desktop shortcut? Sure. And do I want to start it right now? Yep. We're going to click Continue. So now it's starting the program. And so you'll see one that says Launching the Browser. And how do I want to open this? It'll probably pop up what browser you want to use, because this is part of a new style of software where really all of our interface is based on a browser. So I let it go open in Chrome. And if you notice, what it actually does up there, it says localhost 96. So it's trying to go to your local computer at port 9675. And so right now, it's doing some configuration in the back end, and it's reporting back. You've set your computer up now as a web server. So if I had put this on the server back there, we could actually go to it by typing in the server IP address, port 9675, and actually get to it that way. So right now, while it's doing all of its little updates, and it'll take it a while to do that, and then it will want to scan the network. And so we'll keep an eye on it. I'm going to tuck it away in my other window. Well, it's starting to do that. And somewhere in my list of programs, I have where we left off. We left off talking about SANs. And I mentioned the book had a little bit of an error. But the next step in when we're talking about structured and network cabling is power. And so while our network scan is doing its little piece, we want to talk about power. And quite frankly, half the computers in this lab are screwy because of power issues when they did an update. And so we're trying to work through, figure out what we can do and correct them. And so we're going to talk about some of the devices. Now obviously if you're online, you're not going to see this, but most of you have a giant box on your desktop. You guys see that in front of you up here? And if I touch the screen, some of them are set to turn on. You can turn on the display and we'll toggle through some of the settings. And we're monitoring the power in this lab because we don't have enough. This building was never designed for 30 computers sitting in this room, 30 computers in another room. And so we're using these tools to monitor and try to maintain the power needs for this lab. So power becomes an issue. It's part of the reason Google's data centers, Facebook's data center that they're going to open up in Sarpy, that they're where they are is to get enough power. Power is hard to get. All right, I'm going to temporarily pop over here. You'll get to a spot here where it says, all right, now I'm ready to start. And so that account you created, you now need to log into it again. And so I'm going to log in here. And then it'll want a few more in pieces, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just going to hit save. All right. And now I'm going to click Discover and Monitor. So now we're going to start a scan of my computers. So we need to do a couple of more pieces. So I'm going to make this a little bigger so we can see what's going on. Do we have credentials for our Windows computers in here? Do we have an administrator account that we know? We do, don't we? So if I type in, let me move over here so I can type. So it says domain/password. Well, we are SPS Lab. And our lab in here, it's lab user. And our password is at Pru 2017 ! So I could say, yep, I have credentials for Windows. And I can even show my password. On your own computer or own network, you probably don't have an Active Directory. So you could just say, I don't have any. Well, if we're a Mac, Linux, or Unix environment in here, do we have any credentials for that? No. And we're not going to log into the printers or anything other than the default configuration. So I do have credentials there. You can leave it blank if you say you don't have any. It's going to give us some of the similar information. But that actually will let this device log into every computer that's on our domain using that active account. So I'm now going to click Go to Inventory. If it will let me, I can find my mouse again. Come back. Oh, hang on. I left that. I don't have any. go to inventory. And now it's already says it's got 36 devices, but it's currently running a scan. So we're going to do a little more work on that. So I'm going to pop out of that real quick, and I'm going to move that over to the other window so I can keep an eye on it. Just going to drag it over here. So while we're talking about power, we're also scanning our entire network right now to see what's out there on it. So power surges are a problem. Do we have really kind of crappy power around here in Peru? How many times has your power went out? If you've lived here for a while, it goes out pretty frequently, doesn't it? Is that a problem? Yeah. You've gotten probably stuck in Morgan somewhere because you can't get down the elevator. So just from that standpoint, how do we get around? But it can be very frustrating on our network side. So we need to think about how electricity works, what kind of flaws we can have, what kind of things can happen. So the biggest thing we have is a surge. Typically a surge, so a lightning strike happens or we have a big electrical equipment malfunction and the voltage goes way up. So instead of 120 volts, we suddenly have thousands and thousands of volts. Equipment gets destroyed. If you've ever seen what happens when a lightning strike takes out something, it's pretty dramatic. So surges can hurt. Noise, in other words, we have very dirty power, so it's got a lot of things on it. You have to make sure you don't have any there. There you go. All right, so noise can be an issue, especially on our networking side. Because computers and other equipment are very susceptible to very noisy power, and it causes one or two little zeros to become ones, and suddenly the thing we thought we had is different. Blackouts, we have completely lose power. Well, that's certainly an issue around here. And when they do that, if you guys live in the dorms, what do? They make you haul all your butt down to the AWAC center or something silly. And it's kind of a pain in the butt. But one of the most dangerous and damaging things to our electrical equipment is what's called a brownout. And sometimes if you've lived in California or something, they do these on purpose, but they lower the voltage. So instead of 120 volts, you may get 100 volts. But what it forces you to do is that means there's more amperage running through devices to do the same amount of work. And it actually is very, very damaging to your equipment. So many years ago, I ran a firm that we designed drawings for the telecom sector. And we had a whole building full of AutoCAD computers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. And every day at 11 o'clock, almost like clockwork, every machine in that computer lab that we had, all these CAD people were paying. And this has been many years ago, but I was paying $25 an hour then. Everything would shut down. And by the time everything got restarted and the plotters and everything, it would take a good half an hour to get everybody back working. That's a lot of money, right? Plus, did we lose files and other issues? Well, as it turns out, we tried to figure out what was going on, and it took a little bit of investigating. But we had a Chinese restaurant next door. That Chinese restaurant at 11 o'clock turned on all of their electric fryers. They had rows and rows and rows of electric fryers. And it so wiped out the electrical grid on where we were at that even though we had some backup batteries and other things, it wasn't enough to keep it from shutting us down. So we came to come up with a plan. So our plan was, instead of our lunch hour at noon to 1 or whatever we had, we moved it to 11. A lot of times we ate in the Chinese restaurant, very handy. And so we just shut everything down at like 10:45, did a save. So we came up with a plan to work around it. At that point, battery backups were a little more expensive than they are now, but we'll take a look at those and some options for what we can do. So the unit actually on your desk here is a UPS, uninterruptible power supply. So that big black box with the numbers on it that's setting up there, that'll tell you the voltage coming in, voltage going out. got a battery in it, so the power comes in, and then it powers all the devices in the room. We can actually unplug them from the floor jacks for a little bit. It gives us power. It's got a backup battery in there. But there really are two different kinds of backups. So the UPSs that we've got here, these were about $150 a piece. They're not hugely expensive, but at your house you might go, man, I'm not going to spend $150 on one. There are some cheaper models. So there are much cheaper models that are only what they call standby UPSs. So they don't do anything until the power goes off. When the power goes off, they switch on to the battery, and you can run for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes on them. Those work very well, but it doesn't do anything about things like brownouts, where the voltage goes down, or dirty power. These devices that we have here run all the time off that battery. It's always running off the battery. So it's charging the battery, pulling it back off the battery, and giving you really nice power. So they're a little more expensive. Those are in the, these ones we're using here, about the $150 mark. When we were in the little server closet back there, I said on the bottom rack is a UPS for the data closet back there. That particular unit's about $1,000 for a backup. Again, it has more capacity. It's able to run more items out of it, so it's got a bigger battery. It's got some additional pieces. It will actually send me a text message through email and say, hey, I've lost power. That is, if the data is still able to operate. So it's got more advantages. We can spend even more money. Depending on what we want to do, we can spend a huge amount of money. So companies like phone companies spend a lot of money on UPSs. So even if there's a hurricane and we don't have power, they can stay up and running, in some cases, for days on end. So when we look at these, we want to buy one, we need to get one that's sized adequately. So how long do we need to run? How much power do we need to keep it running? Do we want that idea of line conditioning? And how much are we willing to spend? A lot of cases, we pair these with another device called a generator. So some of you went camping, you've had a generator, you hear them in the news. So a generator really is nothing more than a way to generate power. We have one on our campus, but it's only enough to power the administration building and the AWAC center. And so that's why when the power goes out, they send you down to those rooms. Well, a generator generally takes a couple of minutes to kick on. So sometimes you'll hear the term ride-through power. So these UPSs are providing in a lot of data closets ride-through power. They're sized enough that we can get the generator up and running and then provide power with that. So we almost always combine them. So you see generators at data centers, you see in police stations, anywhere that requires full-time power. They can run on a variety of different things. Diesel fuel is really popular. Natural gas, liquid petroleum. You can get them in about anything you want to, but one of the things you have to do is make sure that they have enough fuel to run the length of time that you're going to need. So depending on the size of them, these can be anywhere from a couple of $1,000s to $500,000 would not be uncommon. So the one we have on our campus, my understanding was probably close to $500,000 for that size of generator to run 2 buildings and be able to keep it up. So we have this idea kind of in this chart. You'll see that where we have UPSs and then that generator. So if you ever go by a hospital, for example, you'll see them outside, the generators, and doing that. So one of the keys to this is that idea of we always test them. So you'll usually have monthly tests, weekly tests. We want to make sure that they actually function as intended. But when we design that backup power, we look at power, one of the things we also need to think about is how are we going to keep that data center cool and acceptable? Because if we have power, but we don't have any way to keep it cool, it's going to be a problem fairly quickly. So most of the time, we have specialized heating and ventilation systems for our data closets. Obviously back here we don't, But a lot of times we have ones that will not only monitor the temperature, but they also put in humidity. In the winter, when you guys walk across the carpet and you shock yourselves on a doorknob, that static electricity is not really good for a rack full of servers in there. So a lot of times they have humidifiers and or dehumidifiers and other pieces in there to make sure that it's done. But even on top of that, every data room should be locked with only a limited IT personnel having keys. Why don't we want everybody in our data closet? So we're running a bank. Should we just let all the customers wander into the data center? Is that probably a good idea? So we have to usually have at least key locks. And in fact, if we're doing credit cards or other systems, we may be required by that vendor to have things like door locks, man traps, security cameras. Even if you're the person taking care of that closet, I want them in there just to cover my butt. So if something goes wrong or you've got a vendor that went in there, that you can say, hey, you know what? It wasn't me. This is what happened. How do I cover that and deal with it? So most of the time we also have key locks on them, the latest ones, so you'll know who it is going in, not just a single lock. It's not uncommon to run into that issue of doors unsecured in a data center. And so getting people used to the idea of, hey, let's cool it off and let's make this lock. I've actually run into several businesses that had some data centers that it was the cool down center when the air conditioning, it was too hot in the rest of the building. Employees would just wander in and take a little break in the data center. Not really a great idea. So what other pieces do we have? So we've heard the term NIC before. So network interface card, whether it's built into the motherboard or not, that's the device that allows us to communicate. So every device that communicates on our network has to have a network interface card. And the NICs, we also sometimes will call them a transceiver because it transmits and receives data over some kind of network, whether it's wireless or it's wired, whether it's electrical or it's optical. And so they do a lot of other little pieces. So depending on the type of network card, it may be able to do filtering, it may be able to do some kind of load management. And there is a difference in types of networks cards. So how fast do you need a network card? What speed? What types? The manufacturer? What interfaces? Do I need power over Ethernet, which is really a hot trend? Power over Ethernet allows us to send power on that Ethernet cable. So things like these access points in the ceiling or our HVAC controls, all different kinds of devices, they don't have to have a plugged-in wire for power. They get power through the network. And so that's one of the most common things. Now that VoIP phones are becoming very popular, where your phone plugs into the network versus a phone line, that allows us to, again, keep another piece off of the, somebody having a wall wart plugged in that they knock out, and then they wipe out their phone. So network cards can have a lot of different features. Maximum speed. Most network cards now, at least on the wired ones, are a minimum of a 1 gigabit speed. So we don't generally have to worry too much about that. But how much throughput they can actually put out is different than their maximum speed. So here, for example, is one built into a motherboard. This particular motherboard actually has 2 LANs. So 2 LANs give us some additional flexibility. Most servers have at least 2 LANs on them. And the reason for that is we can bring in data on one side of a network and put it out on a different side. Maybe we lag them together so we double our bandwidth or our throughput by having multiple connections. The server we have that feeds this room actually has 4 network connections on it. And so we can do a couple of different things with it. We can put them together in what's called a lag or a link aggregate group. So instead of one gigabit per second connection, We can have 4 connections all put together. And so you're starting to see that becoming more common. And you're also starting to see faster connections. So this is a PCI. So if we took this computer apart and it needed a new network card, that would be an add-in card. Laptops and other devices, a lot of times you'll have a USB network interface card. So it's the way we connect into that network. So the book goes into how to install. We're going to skip that temporarily. But we also need to talk about how most network cards work. So you talk in full duplex. So you talk and listen at the same time. So when you're talking to your friends on the phone, you're talking and listening at the same time. Half duplex, though, means that you can either talk or send. So think of a walkie-talkie. When you're using a walkie-talkie, both of you can't talk at the same time. One of you has to give it up, or a CB radio. So half duplex would be a little slower if you want to think about it that way, but you get control over that method. And then there's something called simplex. Simplex really means it's only going one direction. So think of a radio station. Most of our networks now are full duplex, but if somehow you've got some older equipment or you have a network issue, you may have to switch to half duplex to do that. So a couple of other things. Most network cards do auto negotiation. So they negotiate with the device and say, hey, I can do 1,000 gigs per second. You can do 1,000 gigs. We're going to select the best link speed and duplexing setup that we can do. Doesn't always work, though. If one of those devices doesn't support it, or if something gets changed, sometimes we can have an issue. So what we're really putting through all this is this idea of that frame, that Ethernet frame. And so you guys have been in Wireshark. We've seen now that you see that Ethernet 2 is the frame type. So Ethernet 2 has a chunk. So here's our whole frame. So we've got a back end, we've got a front end, so it's framed. It's got a header and a trailer. And here is our data. And inside of that data are then those TCP and UDP packets are packed up inside of that. Ethernet tends to be very flexible. It can run on tons of different types of hardware. It's open source, so as long as everybody agrees to the same standard, it can run from one company to another. So if I have a Linksys router, I can get on my Asus computer and they can talk to each other because they're put together. So that frame type can get to be very important. So there are others, but this is kind of the most common one we're going to do. So that trailer, the trailer is pretty short, and what it really does is it does something called a CRC, cyclical redundancy check. So it's just a real quick mathematical operation. It says, all right, this packet that I'm sending should be this, runs a math operation on it, and says 137, and puts it in there, sends 137. I read that, and I get that packet, and it goes up. It said my packet should equate on this CRC to 137. It does. It gives me a check to make sure that my data has arrived. But the header, notice what we're really sending now is we're sending the MAC addresses of your equipment. And remember that MAC address is built into whatever network interface card you're using. So if you're off your phone, it's got a MAC address. So how we map this and how we do this can give us some update and some troubleshooting. Because sometimes simple things can go wrong. Simple things can go wrong. Something can get unplugged. Something can get turned off, which happens. Maybe we've lost power in part of the building. So how do I break down and I start troubleshooting my network? It can be as simple as when we look at our switch, one of the things you can do is you can confuse most switches by taking a cable, like that green one we had the other day in here. You plug both ends into the same switch, guess what happens? forming a loop. And if I don't have spanning tree turned on, and even some switches even with spanning tree turned on, just by doing that, I can actually bring my entire network down. Could that happen out on a box in the area? Yeah. Somebody could plug in a network cable accidentally and form a loop. So network maps, those tools we said, when you build this, you want to make sure it's identifiable as easily as possible. So you want to have a network map. Where is everything at? How is it mapped out? And then we're doing right now what's called network mapping. It's probably actually done. It's probably went through. But we're doing network mapping. So we're discovering what's actually on the network. So you can think of, we have a physical network. Now we're going to put out and see what's actually out there. So you've got a map in front of you. Now you're driving that road trying to see, hey, is there really a gas station at this corner? So things we might want to put in this documentation. What kind of applications are we running? What operating systems? What protocols? What network diagrams are kind of handy? What topologies are we using? So that somebody comes in here and they can see what we're doing. If I contract out my network services, I damn sure want them to provide this with me. I don't want the company that I'm using for services to hold this all in their internal stuff, internal data, because I don't want to have to change vendors and then suddenly I have to rediscover all these things and try to figure out what's happening when something's broken. So these kinds of things, a diagram. So this is actually done using Visio, which is a tool you guys can grab. All these symbols are in here. So this one happens to grab a set of Cisco symbols, but there's symbols out there. And so now you can see a diagram. It says, all right, we know we have the internet, we have a firewall, we have a router, and we can put information behind that. So we'd say, well, that's a HP 2650 switch. Its access point, it's set to a specific IP address. We can even put in things like login details inside of here. So when you click on an item, you get information about it. So we can do a lot of information inside of these diagrams. So that's kind of the graphic. We can also do a wiring schematic. And so we'll show you what one of those looks like. So here's a wiring schematic. So this is kind of showing, doesn't show physically where anything is at, but it shows logically how everything is connected. So I have a drawing, and I thought I had it in this folder, but I have not yet. So I have a drawing I will bring in or put on Blackboard so you guys can look at it, of a very large-scale network and what it looks like from a construction standpoint, and the diagramming and the drawings that you look at to start with. So this is a very common setup. This would be a small business. So here we have our cable modem, and we have a couple of switches. We have all of our devices. In this case, they do have some kind of a VoIP adapter for voice over internet. They have a router. And you'll see that our standards are a little low or old based on what's coming out now. And the reality is, this book's still talking about Windows 8, and this is the latest book that's out from this particular company. Does anybody in here still run Windows 8? Do businesses run Windows 8? No. Businesses kind of avoided Windows 8. Are there a lot of businesses running Windows 7? Yeah. But 8 has kind of fallen off, and Microsoft has even said, yeah, you know, we aren't going to support Windows 8. You can either run Windows 7, we still have support for, or you can run Windows 10. Windows XP still exists. You're going to find that in a lot of businesses. You're going to see that. So all of this talk about how we build this plant is really designed for reliability. We want reliable, fast, decent connections. You want to be able to troubleshoot when something goes wrong. So the more things you have documented, the better it is. So again, you may be contracting out services, but if it's documented and they can come in and fix that a little easier, the better off you are. Or if you have enough skill and knowledge, you go, hey, this switch somehow isn't turned on, a power cable got unhooked, and you bring the network back up. So one of the things we always look for in here is, how do I eliminate what we call single points of failure? So really common, most businesses only have one internet connection, right? They're not willing to pay for two. So if Time Warner Cable, for example, if you're a business running them and they go down, you're just out of business for a while. So part of this, when we do internally, we look at how do I eliminate that single point of failure. All right, so I'm going to go back to my SpiceWorks here really quickly. And I'm going to see where it's at now. So it's discovering devices right now. So it's not completely done, and it will take a while to do that. And clear all messages. But already, it's gotten us some ideas about what's on here. So we can see that we have a couple of devices listed up here. So I can rearrange them by IP address. And so it doesn't tell me a lot about that one yet. It's trying to log in and look at it. But I do see something here. And I see, SPS Labs server. Well, I bet that's where we store some of our items. And it gives me a little bit of information. It says, what's my operating system? Okay. If I click on the device, it's going to tell me a little more about this particular machine. Because this is information it's retrieved. It's going out and polling and asking information. So I can look and I can say, well, all right. So this device is made by Hewlett-Packard. It's a ProLiant ML350 Generation 6. And I'm not saying we're a little behind, but I haven't been able to replace this since 2011 was when it was bought. Generation 10 ML350s are out right now. I just spec'd some out for a couple of corporations. Do I have a serial number? Yeah. I can get, it's included in the domain controllers group. It tells me, oh, my Avast small office, which is our antivirus in here, is not up to date. I can even, because it's an HP or a Dell, I can even say, does it have a warranty? And it will actually go out and ask and check. And it's going to tell me no. So, but what's kind of interesting and I like here, notice our server only has 8 gigs of RAM. All it's doing is serving up a few files. It's not doing anything specialized. And in 2011, that was enough. I probably wouldn't specify one like that right now. But I could even look off that link. I could see that that server back there has a potential to have 192 gigabytes of RAM memory. It shows me the memory slots, and if they're empty or full, and even will take me to a vendor that's willing to sell me memory for that. So SpiceWorks is pretty handy in that regard. And I can do that with any of these devices it's showing. Notice that it even tells me, this happens to be the printer in my office, which I'm connected to our network here. It even tells me the inkjet or the toner levels on my printer. When was my printer? What's its serial number? It's in the printers group. I can see its serial number. So this could be a handy, so notice drum life, 92% remaining. Why do I care as an IT person or even somebody in the office about supplies and office things? Would this be handy if I set up an alert so when my printers got low, it would automatically reorder them? I can do that based out of SpiceWorks here. So it'll show me the interfaces. So in this particular case, that one also has a wireless. You can put in notes. You can add notes about it. So maybe I'm going to add a note on 2017 I replaced toner. So you can even store information in here. So this is building a database about your network. So I'm going to look at the next device down there at 51. And 51, it says, oh, there's some kind of a computer that's got an error. So I don't know which one that is. Doesn't give me a whole lot of information about that one. So either we haven't scanned it completely yet, which it's still in process, or we don't have a ton of information about it. 52, 53, oh, what is this? I see a switch. And back in the back, I didn't see an HP switch, did you? This is actually the switch on computer services side. And so it's got all the information about that switch. So we know that it's an HP ProCurve 2650 switch that feeds our lab. So I can get everything from reviews about it to I can get general info. So here's a serial number. Here's its MAC address. Here's all of the interfaces on that switch. So I can actually tell, that's a 48-port switch, which ones are up. That port doesn't have anything on it. It'll show me the traffic on it. So this is really a handy tool for a lot of different purposes. So let me scroll down. So here's a computer. This one happens to be a Windows 10 machine. We've got a lot of information about it. We can see everything from its configuration as it slowly loads. And because we haven't finished that scan, it may be hanging up on us here. I can see what software is in it. Would I be concerned in my office about what software people are installing on their computers? Do I need to worry about licensing? So it'll show my network shares, software, all different kinds of things. And again, it hasn't completely finished that scan, so some of these may or may not pop up. But it's kind of interesting to see what shows up in here. So here's another computer. We can look at it. It's got its MAC address. We can see exactly how it's configured if it would load. But right now what it's doing is this server is going out and pinging all those machines and getting information on them. So even in our lab, this is kind of a handy, useful piece. We can see what's going on. But think in your business, you can find out, hey, John just installed Cool Blast 27 gaming software. Maybe we need to go talk to him and see why he was able to do that. So I can even look at different devices. So in this case, we're probably not going to see a lot because all I'm seeing is me. But if I had an entire team, I'd be able to see them. In this case, I already see that I have 198 advisories for software out of date. It would be so I can actually look at them. I can see what applications. So we're running Adobe Acrobat 8, Java Auto Updater, Microsoft Exchange clients. So you can actually look and see what software is running on your network at any time. Your dashboard here will give you alerts, and you can even set up, so here I notice I've got a huge percentage that don't have antivirus. I'm updating our antivirus vendor and solution, so you're actually seeing a lot of computers that don't even show antivirus right now. So different pieces that are in there. So that's what a tool like Spiceworks can do. And quite frankly, again, when I go into a business that I have not got much experience with, one of the first things I do is I say, I would like to install this on a machine, scan your network, and I want to see where you're at. It gives me a really quick overview so I can even tell. Why do we have versions of Office 2013, 2016, 2010? So you can get an overview really, really quickly of what's going on in the network. And again, you can set it up so you don't have to just do the inventory. There's a lot of other pieces to this. So The Spiceworks help desk you can actually enable for them. And so users could create help desk tickets. And you think, well, why is that different than just emailing me and saying you have an issue? This creates a log of what's going on. And so if we have repeated issues, you can see that. You can know that, hey, I'm being responded to because it'll email you back. So it can set up a really nice system. So the network monitor, I'm going to let it download. You do not need to install this one. This one runs a real-time monitoring system on our network, so we can look at traffic congestion. We can see, do we have a computer that has an issue? Do we have a network interface card that has went bad? Sometimes when they go bad, they start sending out tons and tons of bad information that can actually take over our network. Oops, there it goes. So I'm going to install the network monitor here real quick, or as quick as it installs here. Install. Next. So the network monitor installs on a slightly different port, but it does something very similar. So we'll take a look at that as soon as it's finished installing. In the meantime, I'm going to jump back into Blackboard and highlight a couple of things that you need to make sure you've done this week. So we talked about Chapter 4. We're going to hit Chapter 5 next week. So there is a quiz over Chapter 4. So you should be able to take that at any moment. There will be a quiz appearing for Chapter 5. Also, there is a Chapter 4 assignment that we will hit where you install an FTP server, and you're doing that on Ubuntu server. So if you do not have Ubuntu server installed, make sure you go back in and do that. So you need that in a VirtualBox Ubuntu server. And we're going to show you how to use the Word now in its built-in screenshots so you can document that really, really easily. There is a discussion board. That jumped out of there. And that discussion board is actually what we have done right now. Did I move it to the top? I did. So you can do it in a VirtualBox session. In VirtualBox, you'll only see the computers in your virtual network. If you've got a Mac, I would advise doing it in the VirtualBox so you can at least see and play around with the program. It's not, I don't believe there's a Mac version of it, quite frankly. So, Case Project 2, some of the screenshots and what they're telling you to do have changed because it's a dynamic development. They develop this and work on it all the time, so it's changing literally on a daily basis. So it's a great tool. I encourage you to look at it. A couple people have already posted. You don't need a ton. I just want you to try it, experiment. And you also need to tell me whether you think this would be a great tool for a business or not and why. So make sure you do that. So there is another discussion board that you should do this week. And so make sure you have went in and done the Week 5 discussion board, because this one is completely extra credit. So make sure you have done both discussion boards. So those are the pieces we have we're working on. So nothing is actually due on Sunday night. That said, do not wait until next weekend to work on this, or you will not get it all done. So I think that happened to a lot of people last week when we had these 2-week chunks, is people waited until the last minute and then went, oh no, I can't really do this starting at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. Some of these, they're not hard and not impossible, but they take a little bit of time. For example, the installing the Spiceworks, it's still installing in this network monitor. On my own computer, when I installed it right before class, it installed in a couple of minutes. Here in this lab environment, it installs a little slower than that. So, as you can see, it's going a little pokey on the install part. So, there we go. And now, I should be able to go back into SpiceWorks. Come here, little SpiceWorks. Here's what we configure. Yeah, almost there. Launching network dashboard. So, again, it's server-based, and notice it says localhost, and now it's using port 8080, so it uses a different port. So I can have both of those available at any given point. And now it's doing some real-time analysis and installing very slowly. But this SpiceWorks is a great tool. There's tons of them out there that do the same thing or very similar things. But it's the only one I know of where they offer it to you for free. Now I have to log in. And again, it wants to know a little bit about us. It's not a big deal. What you're trading off is you're giving out an email address, and you get a little bit of targeted advertising inside of SpiceWorks here to do that. Let's skip. So this is the network monitor. And so in a lot of cases, very busy organizations will have something like this up all the time. And so what you're giving up is you're running this. You've got a little bit of an ad space or something else. So we can add a specific device. So you might want to monitor your servers. You might want to monitor, in this case, it hasn't yet done a complete discovery and doesn't have all the devices in there. But you can monitor specific devices and you can put them on a list. So, do I want to monitor, make sure my server's up and running? Yeah. So, a lot of IT data centers will have screens like that up on big monitors or even on the wall every day just to look at what's going on. So, not very exciting when we haven't yet populated that, but now that we've got it in there, we can actually do that and add a couple of our devices to it. So there is our SpiceWorks. So SpiceWorks, a couple of different things. The other thing it does is this buying community. So there's a lot of vendors are in there. So I will say the one thing I've discovered is you do have to occasionally take some of the things on the discussion boards with a grain of salt. Not every vendor is the world's greatest vendor that's in there. Most of them are pretty good. But if you're getting information from an HP rep, Dell rep, somebody like that, they're usually really, really great in terms of their. So here we can launch all these pieces, and it's got a one-stop shop for us there. So one of the things we discovered on there was there's a switch. I wanted to just show you the depreciation in IT equipment. So that switch looks like we've purchased them for the college at about 2011, 2012. They're no longer being made. I can pick one up for $70 for a 48-port switch, looks like that. New, those are about $1,500. So in 4 years, that's the price of technology has gone down significantly. So notice if I want to do warranty, we'd have to add a little more, but that's what the switch that runs most of this lab looks like. And it's $70 now for a used one. $1,500 to $70 in 4 years. That's craziness. But it's the way of the world. So we will try to see if we can log into it. I don't control that switch, but I have one of the issues we have with it. When I try to go to it, the software on it is old enough that our security software in Java says, nope, you're not going to actually run on here because it's an old version. And so even getting into it to monitor it, we'll have to do a little trickery to do that. So my hope is we can get in there and we can actually look at that one a little bit and take a peek. So I have some other switches we will log in and play around with. So I have some newer ones that I've deployed with some customers that are willing to let me log in, and we can actually see what they look like in action and see what kind of decisions they are. So one of the things we'll look at is the difference between this switch, which is a layer 2 switch, and a new layer 3 switch, what kind of differences there are, why I would pay more for that layer 3. All right, let me hit the stop button.